Hello and welcome everyone. I hope all of you are fine and doing well. Um, Today, this is preferably the last class we have this semester in your philosophy, introduction to philosophy course, in fact. But don't worry, we'll be revising the entire course. Your queries, your questions, they'll be answered. And as far as the rest of the affairs are concerned, they'll go the way they are. So today we be talking about romantic reactionaries and materialism. Now, romantic reactionaries and materialism, they are fairly new concepts in the field of philosophy since they belong to the late 19th century and 20th century. We have to be very mindful of the developments and progress that's been made in the field of literature in association to philosophy. Now, coming towards introduction of today's topic, Romanticism or romantic reactionaries. So, Romanticism is a philosophical movement during the Age of Enlightenment, which emphasized emotional self-awareness. Now, I want you people to underline this portion, which emphasize emotional self-awareness as a necessary precondition to improving society and bettering the human condition. Now, Romanticism it believed that if you want to better human condition and improve our society, for that it has only one precondition, and what is that? Emotional self-awareness. Like the German idealism and Kantianism, with which it is usually linked in a philosophical context, Romanticism was largely centered in Germany during the late 18th and early 19th century. It stands in opposition to the rationalism and empiricism of the preceding age of reason, representing a shift from the objective to the subjective. Now, you might know this from your history of English literature that before Romanticism in English literature, we have the age of reason. And within that age of reason, that was prevailed by empiricism and rationalism. But since Romanticism, it appeared and it was in sharp contrast to the age of reason, to empiricism and rationalism. Why? Because we witness for the very first time a shift from objective to subjective. Moving on, Romanticism in general was a reaction against the scientific rationalization of nature during the age of reason. Now, during the age of reason, nature it was rationalized scientifically, and Romanticism was basically a revolt against it. Okay, which left little room for the freedom and creativity of the human spirit. Now, this scientific rationalization of nature it left little room for the freedom and creativity of the human spirit, and it stressed strong emotion as a source of aesthetic experience. Now, Romanticism in revolt to the age of reason or to the rationalization of nature, it proposed and it stressed strong emotion as a source of aesthetic experience. It was embodied more strongly in the visual arts. Romanticism, we were talking about it, so it was embodied in the visual arts, music and literature, but it also had a counterpart in philosophical thought, but it had its place in philosophical thought as well. Now, philosophical Romanticism holds, it believes that the universe is a single, unified, and interconnected whole. That this universe, it is not distributed, it is not in different parts, rather it is a single, unified, and interconnected whole, and full of values, tendencies, and life, not merely objective, lifeless matter. Now, in the age of reason, they believe that the universe in itself is a mere objective lifeless matter, but over here they revolted against all these things. The romantics, they revolted against all these things. The romantic view is that reason, objectivity, and analysis radically falsify. Now, falsify means prove wrong reality by breaking it up into disconnected lifeless entities, and the best way of perceiving reality is through some subjective feeling or intuition, through which we participate in the subject of our knowledge instead of viewing it from the outside. Now, since those people in the age of reason or empiricism or rationalism, they believe that this entire universe is a lifeless matter. The romanticism, this movement. It stood against them. It views the reason, objectivity, and analysis, which are the core elements of the age of reason, they radically falsify. They prove wrong the reality. Why? Because it breaks it up into disconnected, lifeless entities. And now, Romanticism says that the best way of perceiving reality is through some subjective feeling or intuition. You might have heard about that Keats' negative capability or the sense of empathy. Now, Romantics, they believe that until and unless you haven't got yourself to the position of another living entity, you cannot feel their pain. You cannot empathize and sympathize with them, and since you cannot empathize and sympathize with them, you are lifeless, and if you are lifeless, you are radically false. Okay. Nature is an experience and not an object for manipulation and study, and once experienced, the individual becomes in tune with his feelings, and this is what helps him to create moral values. Nature is an experience. Nature is not a lifeless entity. This is what the Romantics believe. It is not something for manipulation and study only. Rather, they believe that the individual who tastes nature becomes in tune with his feelings, and this is what helps him to create moral values. As I have given you the example with Keats. Now, with Keats, this thing was quite common, and specifically in his Ode to the Nightingale, where he seizes his own identity, where he stops considering himself to be a human being, to be John Keats. Rather, he becomes a nightingale, and he openly expresses this desire. This is the basic trait of Romanticism. In Romanticism, you do not become yourself. You do not remain yourself. In fact, you become part of that entity. Let's suppose there is a road accident in front of you. Romanticism believes that you need to feel the pain, the agony of the person lying on the road. Until and unless you haven't done that, you cannot create proper moral values. Now, moving on with its history, the roots of philosophical Romanticism can be found in the work of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Immanuel Kant. Rousseau, who is credited with the idea of the noble savage, uncorrupted. Now, what is his idea of noble savage? It is about a human being. He calls human being as a noble savage, which is, or who is uncorrupted by artifice in society. Any person who is not corrupted by artifice in the society is a noble savage for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he calls that noble savage as a human being. He thought that civilization fills man with unnatural wants and seduces him away from his true nature and original freedom. This is his concept of noble savage, upon which the philosophy of Romanticism is based. Kant's theory of transcendental idealism, which we've discussed earlier, it posited that we do not directly see things in themselves. We do not see directly things in themselves the way they are. We only understand the world through our human point of view. An idea, we understand the world through our human point of view. That means we understand the world through our experience. Until and unless you haven't shunned your own identity and become a part of what you are seeing or experiencing, you cannot experience it properly. And this is basically an idea developed by American transcendentalism of the mid-19th century. The German idealist who followed on from Kant and adopted and expanded his work with their own interpretations of idealism can all be considered romantics in their outlook. Now, the German idealist who followed on from Kant and adopted and then expanded his ideas, all of them in one way or the other, they can be called as romantics from their outlooks. Okay. Among these people, the most important were John Gottlieb Fichte, Friedrich Schelling, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and arguably Arthur Schopenhauer. These people, all of them, they were basically those German idealists who, from their outlook, looks to be romantics and who followed on Kant and expanded his ideas. Hegel was perhaps the most influential of the German idealist philosophers, and his idea that each person's individual consciousness or mind is really part of the absolute mind, absolute idealism, had far-reaching effects. Now, Hegel, who had this concept, was the most influential among these names. After his death, however, the Hegelians were split between the old Hegelians who uncritically accepted Hegel's romantic views and the young Hegelians who wanted to continue the revolution of ideas using his concept of dialectics. Now, dialectics we'll be talking about it later on, but this is his concept. And the young Hegelians, they wanted to develop on the initial concepts and ideas of Hegel. They did not stop researching, though the old Hegelians, they accepted Hegel's views the way they were, but young Hegelians, they kept on doing the research. The young Hegelians, their ideas influenced a generation of romantic writers such as John Wolfgang von Goethe, William Blake, Samuel Coleridge, William Wordsworth, Lord Byron, John Keats, Shelley, Victor Hugo, artists such as John Constable, Joseph Mallard, and Theodore. Such people, they had directly been influenced by the young Hegelians and their philosophy. And it kept on thriving in the age of Romantic literature, even specifically with the English perspective. Now, coming towards materialism, the later part of our discussion for today, let's talk about materialism and define it. Materialism thinks that the only thing that can be truly proven to exist is matter. Materialism holds that the only thing that can be truly proven to exist is matter. Thus, according to materialism, all things are composed of material and all phenomena are the result of material interactions, with no accounting of spirit or consciousness, with no interruption of spirit or consciousness. As well as general concept in metaphysics, it is more specifically applied to the mind-body problem in philosophy of mind. In philosophy of mind, this idea already existed. In common use, the word materialist refers to a person for whom collecting material goods is an important priority, or who primarily pursues wealth and luxury or otherwise displays conspicuous consumption. This can be more accurately termed economic materialism. Now, materialism in our routine life, in our daily life, it refers to a person who pursues wealth and luxury or otherwise displays conspicuous consumption. But this form of materialism is called economic materialism. Keep that in mind. Moving on with materialism, with its insistence. By insistence over here we mean emphasis. With its emphasis on a single basic substance. Single basic substance is matter. Anything that exists is matter in material terms. It is a type of monism. Monism is a belief in one entity at one time, is opposed to dualism or pluralism. It is totally opposed to dualism. Now, dualism is a concept where you can believe in more than one entity at a time, specifically or particularly in two entities. Or pluralism is from plural, where you can believe in so many entities. So monism, it basically stood against dualism and pluralism. Okay, and it can also be considered a variety of naturalism. It can also be considered a variety of naturalism, which is a belief that nature is all that exists and that all things supernatural therefore do not exist. Anything that is material, anything that is present, anything that is matter, it is nature, therefore it exists. Anything that is supernatural, for example, angels, ghosts, omens, myths and mythologies, they do not therefore exist. Okay, so materialism, it has this one aspect from or one variety from naturalism as well. It stands like the related concept of physicalism in contrast to idealism, also known as immaterialism. Okay, it stands like the related concept of physicalism. Now, physical once again refers to the physical existence of the world or of the objects around us. So it has this materialism, it has a sense of physicalism in it as well, which is in sharp contrast to idealism. And now, what did idealism believe in? It believed in immaterialism and solipsism. Immaterialism or solipsism. Physicalism, however, has evolved with the physical sciences to incorporate far more sophisticated notions of physicality than just matter. For example, wave particle relationships, and non-material forces produced by particles. I hope it's easy since it is self-explanatory. Coming towards the history of materialism, the Karvaka school of ancient Indian philosophy developed a theory of materialism and atomism as early as 600 BC. Ancient Greek philosophers like Thales, Parmenides, Anaxagoras, Democritus, and then later Epicurus and Lucretius, 99 to 55 BC, all prefigure later materialist. All of them, all these names, they contribute to the later materialist and contributed towards the classic formulation of materialism. Now, the foundation and formulation of materialism, it has its roots in the Karvaka school of ancient Indian philosophy. Okay, Lucretius wrote De Rerum Natura, The Nature of Things, the first masterpiece of materialist literature around 50 BC during the long reign of Christianity. Denial of spirit is the basic reality was condemned by the church. Then it was not until the 17th century that interest in materialism was revived by the scientist Pierre Gassendi from 1592 to 1655. And the political philosopher Thomas Hobbes, as well as other French Enlightenment thinkers, including Denis Diderot. Okay, Denis Diderot. I'm hearing this name for the first time. I've heard about Hobbes and Gassendi, but yeah. Okay. Now these people, they are to be called as later materialists since they have revived the earlier idea of the Karvaka school of ancient Indian philosophy, who have basically developed this theory of materialism for the very first time. Moving on with its history, the second masterpiece of materialist literature was Baron Paul de Holbach anonymously published La Système de la Nature, The System of Nature, which appeared in France in 1770. Although the dualism of Descartes remained more popular, largely owing to its compatibility with Christianity. Now, this book, The System of Nature, by Baron Pauli, it got published in France in 1770, but at that time the dualism of Descartes and his ideas, they were prevailing the society. So this work, it went unnoticed. But then the German philosopher Ludwig Bichner, influential Kraft and Stoff, Force and Matter, followed in 1884 with the triumphs of science in the 19th and 20th century, not least Charles Darwin's works on evolution and advances in atomic theory, neuroscience and computer technology. A majority of philosophers today would probably identify themselves as materialist of one kind or another. Now, concluding our discussion for materialism and its history and how did it develop, slowly and gradually, step by step, when we come to today's world or to the modern era, so philosophers in one way or the other, they are materialist, either of one kind or of another. Moving on towards types of materialism, the various types of reductive and non-reductive physicalism needs a different section, but there are some other related concepts which can be mentioned briefly here. Dialectical materialism. It is the philosophical basis of Marxism and communism. The term, which was never actually used by Marx himself, refers to the notion of a synthesis of George Hegel's theory of dialectics. I promised you earlier that we will be talking about dialectics. Now, what is the dialectics? The concept that any idea or event, the thesis, generates its opposite, the antithesis, eventually leading to a reconciliation of opposites. Reconciliation of opposites, the way we have beauty, ugliness, the way we have day and night. So its reconciliation is what he calls synthesis, and that is what he means by his theory of what we call dialectics. Okay, and new, more advanced synthesis and materialism in the respect that dialectics could also be applied to material matters like economics. Now, he had a belief that dialectics, hence it is applied everywhere else. It can also be applied in material matters like economics, wealth, finance. The application of the principle of dialectical materialism to history and sociology. The main context in which Marx used it is known as historical materialism. Now, if Marx has used this phrase dialectical materialism, he has used it in the sense of historical materialism. And now, what do you mean by historical materialism? Historical materialism, or the materialist conception of history, is the Marxist methodological approach to the study of society, economics, and history, which was first articulated by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels from 1820 to 1895, and has been expanded and refined by many academic studies since. It is essentially the application of the principle of dialectical materialism. It is essentially the application, the practicality of the principle of dialectical materialism. Since we believe that the historical materialism of Karl Marx, it came out of dialectic, and sense dialectical materialism. Okay. Now, according to Marx, for human beings to survive, they need to produce and reproduce the material requirements of life. And this production is carried out through a division of labor based on very definite production relations between people. Now, Marx, he had this one belief. He believed that human beings, if they want to survive, they need to produce and reproduce. And let's suppose I'm a teacher or I'm a lecturer, but whatever I earn,